The grass behind the house was trampled down to the earth. Someone had been walking in circles there for months, studying his every step. Elias stood at the edge of the tree line, his boots sinking into the soft mud of the Appalachian foothills, staring at the anomaly. It was not a game trail. Deer did not walk in perfect, geometric ovals, and bears did not pace back and forth until the soil was packed as hard as concrete. This was a track, a rut worn into the world by sheer, obsessive repetition. It looked like the pacing ground of a caged animal, but the cage was Elias's property line, and the animal was on the outside. The late October wind bit at his exposed neck, but the chill that ran down his spine had nothing to do with the weather. Elias crouched down, his knees popping, to inspect the dirt more closely. That was when he saw them. Pressed into the mud, half buried by the recent rains, were cigarette butts. Dozens of them. He reached out with a trembling hand and pried one loose. He wiped the dirt away to reveal the brand stamp near the filter. Redstone Heavy. Elias froze. He slowly reached into his own flannel shirt pocket and pulled out his pack. Redstone Heavy. It was a garbage brand, cheap and harsh, sold only at a specific chain of gas stations 3 towns over. He had smoked them for 20 years. Nobody else he knew smoked them. He stood up, his breath coming in short, white puffs. He was not just being watched. He was being studied. The realization should have sent him running to his truck. A sane man, a man with a family or a fear of death, would have packed a bag and driven until the gas tank ran dry. But Elias was not a man who ran. He was a retired foreman who had spent his life bullying steel and concrete into submission. He had bought this cabin to die in peace, not to be chased off by some creep with a fixation. Fear curdled instantly into a hot, corrosive rage. This was his dirt, his sanctuary. "You want to watch?" Elias muttered to the empty forest, his voice harsh and gravelly. "I'll give you a show." He marched back to the cabin, the heavy thud of his boots echoing his anger. He did not call the police. The sheriff was 40 minutes away, and Elias did not trust anyone who had not calloused their hands for a living. Instead, he went to his tool shed. He spent the afternoon turning his home into a fortress. He mounted trail cameras, the expensive kind with night vision and cellular uplink, on the 4 corners of the house. He checked the motion sensor floodlights. He cleaned his shotgun, a Mossberg 500 that had seen better days but never failed to cycle a shell. By sunset, Elias was ready. He placed a chair in the center of the living room, facing the large bay window that looked out toward the tree line. He set a pot of black coffee on the side table and laid the shotgun across his lap. He turned off every light in the house. He was the spider now. He would wait in the center of his web, and when the fly came back to walk its little circle in the grass, Elias would be there to greet it. He took a sip of the bitter coffee, his eyes adjusting to the gloom, watching the shadows lengthen across the yard. He felt in control. He felt dangerous. He had no idea that he had already made the first mistake. By staying, he had not become the hunter. He had just voluntarily locked himself in the cage. The transition from wakefulness to oblivion was not gradual. It was a cliff. Elias remembered checking his watch at 2:14 a.m. The yard was silent. The wind had died down. He remembered taking a sip of coffee, which tasted oddly metallic, colder than it should have been. And then, there was nothing. No nodding off, no heavy eyelids. Just a sudden, violent erasure of consciousness. He woke with a gasp, his lungs seizing as if he had been underwater. Sunlight streamed aggressively through the bay window, blinding him. The sudden brightness sent a spike of pain through his skull. Elias scrambled upright, the shotgun clattering to the floor. He was still in the chair. It was morning, 10 o'clock a.m. He had slept for 8 hours. "Damn it!" he hissed, rubbing his face. Panic surged in his chest. How could he have slept? He had been wired, fueled by adrenaline and caffeine. He looked down at the coffee mug. It was empty, a dry, brownish residue at the bottom. He grabbed the shotgun and racked the slide, checking the chamber. Still loaded. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Even the refrigerator hum seemed dampened. Elias stood on shaky legs and moved to the window. The yard was empty. The tree line was still. But as his eyes scanned the perimeter, his stomach dropped. The trail camera mounted on the northeast corner of the porch, the one pointing directly at the circular path in the grass, was wrong. It was not smashed. It was not stolen. It had been carefully, deliberately rotated. The lens was now facing the cabin wall, staring blankly at the cedar siding. He ran to the back door, throwing it open. The south camera turned to the wall. The west camera turned to the wall. Someone had been here. They had not just walked the perimeter. They had come onto the porch. They had touched his house. And they had done it while he sat 10 feet away, unconscious. Elias rushed back inside, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He went to the laptop he had set up on the kitchen table, the hub for the camera feeds. His hands shook so badly he could barely type his password. He pulled up the footage history. The files from 2 a.m. to 3 o'clock a.m. were corrupt. Just static. No, he whispered. No, no, no. He kept clicking, checking the internal SD cards of the cameras themselves. The outdoor cameras showed nothing but the moment they were turned. A gloved hand filling the frame, gentle, almost polite, before the view swung to the wood. But there was one camera Elias had forgotten about. A nanny cam he bought years ago to watch a mischievous puppy, which he absent-mindedly left plugged in on the bookshelf behind his recliner. It faced the living room. Faced him. He pulled the memory card and shoved it into the laptop. He found the file timestamped 3:30 a.m. He hit play. The grainy night vision footage showed Elias slumped in the chair, head back, mouth slightly open, deep in a chemically induced stupor. For the first 2 minutes, nothing happened. Then the front door, which Elias had triple-locked, creaked open. A figure stepped into the room. It was tall, dressed in dark clothing that swallowed the infrared light. It moved with terrifying silence. No hesitation, no fear. The figure walked directly to where Elias slept. Elias watched the screen, his hand clamped over his mouth to stifle a scream. The intruder did not raise a weapon. They did not steal the shotgun. They stood directly in front of Elias, inches away from his knees. And then the figure slowly bent at the waist. They lowered their face until it was level with Elias's. They stayed there for a long moment, staring. Then the figure began to move. But it was not random movement. As Elias's chest rose with a breath, the intruder's chest rose in perfect sync. As Elias's head lolled slightly to the left, the intruder tilted their head to the left, matching the angle precisely. When Elias's hand twitched on the armrest, the intruder's hand twitched in the air. It was not an attack. It was a rehearsal. The figure spent an hour in that room, mimicking, mirroring, absorbing. At 4:30 a.m., the intruder reached out and gently, tenderly, tucked the blanket around Elias's shoulders. Then they turned and walked out the door. But before they left the frame, the intruder paused. They looked directly at the nanny cam. They did not try to hide. The figure reached up and pulled down the ski mask. The video quality was low, the grain heavy, but the shape of the face was undeniable. The intruder had a thick, graying beard, a receding hairline, heavy brows. Elias was staring at a face that looked exactly like his own. Elias threw up in the kitchen sink. Violent, dry heaves that left his throat burning. He was not dealing with a stalker. He was not dealing with a thief. The realization hit him with the weight of a physical blow. He was being replaced. He grabbed the shotgun again, his knuckles white. He could not stay here. He had to leave. Now. But as he reached for his car keys, a thought stopped him. The intruder had come in. How? The locks were untouched. The windows were intact. The coffee. He looked at the empty mug. Someone had tainted the coffee before he drank it, which meant they had been in the house before he even set the trap. They had been watching him set up the cameras, watching him load the gun, watching him brew the coffee, laughing at his futile little fortress. They were already inside. Elias began to tear the house apart. He was not looking for the intruder anymore. He was looking for the infection. He overturned the sofa. He ripped the cushions. He checked the attic. Nothing. Then he went to the bedroom. He dropped to his knees and looked under the bed. Dust bunnies. An old shoe. He dragged himself across the floor, checking the baseboards. Near the corner of the room, where the floorboards met the wall, he felt a draft. A cold, damp breath of air coming from below. He pulled back the rug. One of the wide oak floorboards was loose. It had not been nailed down. It was a concealed hatch, expertly cut to blend in with the grain. Elias pried it open with the barrel of the shotgun. Below lay the crawlspace, a dark, dirt-floored cavern that ran the length of the house. He clicked on his flashlight and shone it into the hole. It was not just a crawlspace. It was a living quarter. Directly beneath his bed, a sleeping bag was rolled out on a tarp. There were wrappers from his brand of beef jerky, empty water bottles, and tacked to the underside of his floorboards, inches beneath where he had slept every night for the last 2 years, was a dense collage of Polaroids. Elias dropped into the hole, ignoring the claustrophobia screaming in his mind. He crawled toward the nest. The photos were of him. Elias sleeping, Elias eating, Elias brushing his teeth. Taken from cracks in the walls, from the windows, from impossible angles. But it was not just photos. There was a stack of notebooks. Elias opened one. His handwriting stared back at him. Not forged, practiced. Pages and pages of his signature, starting out shaky and becoming indistinguishable from the real thing. Lists of his PIN numbers, the password to his email, the names of his estranged children, the dates of his parents' deaths. And in the center of the nest sat a small digital voice recorder. Elias pressed play. Static hissed and then a voice spoke. "Hey Buster, come here, boy. Good dog." It was Elias' voice. But then the recording clicked and repeated. "Hey Buster, come here, boy. Good dog." A slight adjustment in pitch. A little more gravel. "Hey Buster, come here, boy." Elias listened in horror as the voice on the tape dissected his own speech patterns. It practiced the slight wheeze he had from years of smoking. Practiced the way his voice cracked when he was angry. It practiced the specific, rhythmic cadence he used when talking to himself. It was not a recording of Elias. It was the intruder, refining the instrument. The tape skipped forward. "I'm afraid I have some bad news," the voice on the tape said. Elias' voice, somber and steady. Elias had an accident. The fire, it took everything. Elias froze. The body was unrecognizable. The voice practiced, just teeth and bones. "But I'm here. I'm okay. I'm going to start over." The voice chuckled. A dry, rasping sound that belonged to Elias, coming from a mouth that was not his. "I am Elias now." The realization washed over him like ice water. The path in the grass was not insanity. It was gait training. The mimicry in the living room was not mocking. It was the final dress rehearsal. The intruder did not just want to kill him. Killing was messy. It left questions. No, this thing wanted to become him. It wanted his pension. It wanted his land. It wanted to slip into his life like a hand into a glove, and no one, not the bank, not the sheriff, not his distant kids, would ever know the difference. Elias was just a loose end in his own life. A sound from outside snapped the spell. It was a whistle. Sharp, distinctive. 2 short bursts and 1 long. It was the whistle Elias used to call his dog. Elias scrambled backward, cracking his head against a floor joist. He ignored the pain and clawed his way back to the hatch. He hauled himself up into the bedroom, gasping for air, covered in the grave dirt of his own home. He ran to the back window. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, bloody shadows across the yard. At the edge of the woods, where the circular path was beaten into the earth, a figure stood. He was wearing Elias' spare Carhartt jacket, the one that had been hanging in the mudroom. He was wearing Elias' old work boots. He stood with Elias' slouch, favoring his left knee just like Elias did when the weather turned cold. And running across the yard, tail wagging furiously, was Buster. "No!" Elias screamed, slamming his hand against the glass. Buster! No! The dog did not hear him. Buster reached the figure and jumped up, licking the man's hands. The figure scratched the dog behind the ears, exactly the spot Elias knew Buster loved. The figure looked up at the window. He did not smile. He did not wave. He simply nodded, a curt acknowledgement of a job finished. It was the nod Elias gave to his crew when the shift was over. The imposter turned and began walking toward the house. He walked with Elias's stride. He had Elias's keys in his hand. He had Elias's dog at his heel. Elias looked at the shotgun in his hand. He could shoot. He could open the window and blow the man away. But then what? The police would come. They would find Elias, the crazy old man who lived alone, standing over a dead body that looked disturbingly like him. They would find the evidence the imposter had likely already planted. The narrative was already written. If Elias killed him, Elias would go to prison or an asylum. And looking at the man walking confidently across the lawn, Elias realized something worse. The man was a better Elias. He moved with more purpose. He had fixed the limp. He had the dog's loyalty. He had the keys. The premiere was starting. The original actor was no longer needed on stage. Elias backed away from the window. A strange, cold clarity settled over him. If he could not keep the life, he would make sure there was no life left to steal. He ran to the utility closet in the hallway. He grabbed the red jerry can of gasoline he kept for the generator. He did not hesitate. He uncapped it and began to pour. He splashed the fuel over the hardwood floors. He drenched the curtains. He poured a trail down the hallway, into the kitchen, and over the table where the laptop sat. He heard the key turn in the front lock. The tumbler clicked. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. The heavy boots on the porch. Elias reached into his pocket and pulled out his Zippo lighter. He flicked it open. The flame danced, small and yellow. "Welcome home," Elias whispered. He dropped the lighter onto the gasoline-soaked rug. The air ignited with a whoosh that knocked the wind out of him. A wall of fire roared up instantly, separating the front of the house from the back. The heat was blistering. Elias turned and ran, not to the front door, but to the back. He burst out onto the porch, the smoke alarm finally screaming its high-pitched death knell above him. He did not look back at the figure in the doorway. He did not look for the dog. He sprinted for his truck, parked on the gravel drive. He fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking, choking on the smoke that was already billowing from the eaves. He cranked the engine. It roared to life. As he threw the truck into reverse, the front window of the cabin blew out, showering the lawn with glass. Flames licked up the siding, consuming the cedar, consuming the photos under the floorboards, consuming the trap. Through the shimmering heat and the smoke, Elias saw the figure standing on the front lawn. The imposter was not trying to put out the fire. He was just standing there, watching it burn. The imposter raised a hand and pointed at Elias. It was not a threat. It was an accusation. You ran. You abandoned it. "It's mine now." Elias slammed the accelerator and tore out of the driveway, tires spitting gravel. He drove like a madman down the mountain road, putting mile after twisting mile between him and the pillar of black smoke rising into the twilight sky. He did not stop at the sheriff's office. He did not stop at the gas station. He drove until he hit the interstate, and then he just kept driving south. He had no name now, no history, no dog, no home. He reached into his pocket to grab a cigarette, to calm his nerves, but his pocket was empty. He had left the pack on the kitchen table. Elias gripped the steering wheel and let out a shaky, hysterical laugh. He was a ghost. And somewhere back on Rowan Mountain, amidst the ashes of his former life, a man with his face was probably already explaining to the fire department how lucky he was to have survived, practicing the story until it became the truth.